Order! Order!
The ayes to the right, 321. The noes to the left, 278.
The ayes to the right, 321. The noes to the left, 278. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlock. Order. Order. Point of order. The Prime Minister.
On point of order, Mr. Speaker, the House has today provided a clear majority against leaving without a deal. However, I will repeat what I have said before.
The House must calm itself. Long time to go. Today, subsequent days. Keep calm. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, these are about the choices that this House faces. The legal default in UK and EU law remains that the UK will leave the EU without a deal unless something else is agreed. The onus is now on every one of us in this House to find out what that is. The options before us are the same as they always have been. We could leave with the deal which this government has negotiated over the past 2 years. We could leave with the deal we have negotiated but subject to a second referendum, but that would risk no Brexit at all. Damaging the fragile trust between the British public damaging the fragile trust between the British public and the members of this House. We could seek to negotiate a different deal. However, the EU has been clear that the deal on the table is indeed the only deal available. Mr. Speaker, I also confirmed last night...
Order. The great likelihood, I await further comment, but I think I can say this without fear of contradiction, is that there will be further opportunities for these matters to be debated. But in the immediate term, please, let us have some courtesy. Of that I think we can be sure. There will be further debate on these matters. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I also confirmed last night that if the House declined to approve leaving without a deal on the 29th of March 2019, the Government would bring forward a motion on whether the House supports seeking to agree an extension to Article 50 with the EU, which is the logical consequence of the votes over the past 2 days in this House. The Leader of the House will shortly make an emergency business statement confirming the change to tomorrow's business. The motion we will table will set out the fundamental choice facing this House. If the House finds a way in the coming days to support a deal, it would allow the Government to seek a short, limited technical extension to Article 50 to provide time to pass the necessary legislation and ratify the agreement we have reached with the EU. But let me be clear, such a short technical extension is only likely to be on offer if we have a deal in place. Therefore, the House has to understand and accept that if it is not willing to support a deal in the coming days, and as it is not willing to support leaving without a deal on the 29th of March, then it is suggesting that there will need to be a much longer extension to Article 50. Such an extension would undoubtedly require the United Kingdom to hold European Parliament elections in May 2019. I do not think that would be the right outcome. But the House needs to face up to the consequences of the decisions it has taken.
I thank the Prime Minister for what she said. Point of order, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, tonight this House has once again definitely ruled out no deal. The Prime Minister said the choice was between her deal and no deal. In the last 24 hours, Parliament has decisively rejected both her deal and no deal. While an extension of Article 50 is now inevitable, the responsibility for that extension lies solely and squarely at the Prime Minister's door. But, Mr. Speaker, extending Article 50 without a clear objective is not a solution. Parliament must now take control of the situation. In the days that follow, Mr. Speaker, myself, the Shadow Brexit Secretary and others will have meetings with members across the House to find a compromise solution that can command support in the House. This means, Mr. Speaker, doing what the Prime Minister failed to do 2 years ago in searching for a consensus on the way forward. Labour has set out a credible alternative plan. Honourable members across this House are coming forward with proposals, whether that's for a permanent customs union, a public vote, Norway Plus, or other ideas. Let us, as a House of Commons, work now to find a solution to deal with the crisis facing this country and the deep concerns that many people have for their livelihood, for their lives, their future, their jobs, their communities and their factories. It's up to us, as the House of Commons, to look for and find a solution to their concerns. That is what we were elected to do.
Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let's be in no doubt that we are in a constitutional crisis. And we're in a constitutional crisis at the making of the Prime Minister that has run down the Brexit clock. And what we see from the Prime Minister is a denial of the facts, that she's faced 2 enormous defeats on her meaningful vote. Her deal is dead. And I am delighted that the House of Commons tonight is given a very clear expression that this House, under no circumstances, on no time limit, wants no deal. And what the Prime Minister should have done this evening is come to the dispatch box with a degree of humility, accept that she has failed, and to immediately put in place the legislation to withdraw from legislation the threat of us leaving the European Union on the 29th of March. Why has the Prime Minister not done that? What this House needs to do tomorrow is to take control of that process. We don't need a time-limited extension to Article 50. It must be open-ended. And I, for one, welcome elections to the European Parliament. But we now, Mr. Speaker, must move on and have a meaningful debate about a people's vote. And yes, if necessary, we have to look at the revocation of Article 50. But let me say this to the Prime Minister. I repeat again that Scotland will not be dragged out of the European Union against its will, and everything which has gone on in this House is a determination that the best interest of the people of Scotland will be as an independent European nation.
I will come to the honourable gentleman, but I will take the Leader of the Liberal Democrat Party first. Yes, point of order, Sir Vincent Cable.
Mr. Speaker, now that the House has given effect to its will so clearly on separate occasions, can you give us the benefit of your help and your advice as to how to translate these declaratory motions into practical action?
If the right honourable gentleman would forgive me, and to be honest, even if he won't, I prefer to hear remaining points of order and then to invite the Leader of the House to deliver the supplementary or emergency business statement, and we will see what is intended to take place tomorrow, and we may well learn tomorrow of what is intended to take place in subsequent days. There has been a clear expression of will by the House. I rather imagine there will be conversations amongst colleagues. What I would say to the right honourable gentleman is ultimately, the House can debate what the House wants to debate, and we will see what it wants to debate and what shape events take in the days to come. I don't want to express myself more forcefully than that, and I don't think that would be right. But the right honourable gentleman need be in no doubt that these matters will be fully debated, and members will have the opportunity to put their point of view, and in all likelihood, many propositions will come to be tested.
Point of order.
If the Right Honourable Gentleman will forgive me, I'll just take the point of order first from Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if you might be in a position to confirm that, as a matter of constitutional fact, a motion of this House, though important, cannot override statute law.
A motion of the House does not override statute law. That is true. If members who have supported a motion want to ensure its ultimate success, further steps are required. And I think members who have keenly attended to these matters in recent weeks are aware of that, and they know that there are opportunities available to them if they wish to take those opportunities. Yes, point of order, Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding what the Prime Minister has just told the House, the time has come for two things to take place. The first is for the government to respect the democratic instruction of the House of Commons. And the second, since the Prime Minister says we have to be in favour of something, and I agree with her, is for the government to facilitate the House of Commons having the chance to vote on a series of indicative propositions so that we can attempt to see whether we can find a way forward. And I very much welcome, if I may say so, Mr. Speaker, what you said a moment ago about your willingness to ensure that the House of Commons gets the opportunity to debate that which it wishes to debate.
Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman. I stand by that. I think it's what any self-respecting speaker should say and mean. I will deal with those who indicated earlier, but I'll come to the Right Honourable Lady. Point of order, Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do wonder how the Prime Minister has the brass neck to come to this chamber and to say that we should be worried about losing fragile trust when she herself is responsible for losing the trust both of this Parliament and of the country. She has just whipped her members to vote against the deal which yesterday she stood at that dispatch box and promised would be a free vote. We need urgently an extension of Article 50, and it needs to not be time limited, because we need the time that is necessary in order to resolve this by going back to the country. Because if the last few weeks have proved anything, it is that MPs in this House are incapable of finding something they agree on, and it needs to go back to the people as soon as possible in a people's vote.
What I say to the Honourable Lady, who was intending, I thought, or attempting to raise a point of order, is that we will have to wait for the business statement by the Leader of the House, but unless I have a problem with my short-term memory, and I don't think I do, my clear recollection is that the government indicated that if the House voted to demonstrate its opposition to exit from the European Union without a deal in the vote or votes today, there would be an opportunity on Thursday for there to be votes, or a vote, or possibly a number of votes, on an idea or ideas of Article 50 extension. So I keenly anticipate that the Honourable Lady will be in her place, not just for the business statement, but tomorrow for such important proceedings as we can expect to take place. Before I come to the Honourable Gentleman, point of order, the Father of the House, Mr. Kenneth Clarke.
Mr. Speaker, when these arrangements for this week were announced, my understanding was that the government was saying that if they lost the vote on their preferred deal, then there would be 2 days in which the House would be given the opportunity to express its clear opinion on no deal, and if that was clear, another day to say whether an extension was desired by the House, with the plain implication that the government was going to accept the decision of the House and act on it. Indeed, we understand a free vote was extended to ministers so that the proper expression of opinion could be given. As soon as the House expressed its opinion on no deal, the government attempted to quash it. and voted against it, putting a 3-line whip on the people they'd previously given a free vote, with a complete lack of success, so that the majority actually soared. So if this evening the Prime Minister or another minister will not just accept that this is not just another motion, as if it was a Women's Institute debate that had expressed an opinion, could... And I have higher regard for Women's Institute's opinions than I do. I have a better regard than the government does for the opinions of this House. But can we have an assurance from somebody that tomorrow's debate is actually intended to set policy and is not just a mere expression of opinion? That's my serious point, though no doubt I'd be deluged with protests from women's institutes around the country. The unfortunate example I chose. I repeat my complete respect for the opinion of all Women's Institute clients.
I'm grateful to the right honourable learned gentleman for his point of order. My understanding, for what it's worth, is the same as his. That was the clear commitment. I'm sure that is what was intended, that was what was promised, that was what was understood, and I'm sure that I have every expectation that the Leader of the House will reiterate today what's been said in recent days. It would be very strange if that weren't the case, but I have no reason to believe that the government has suddenly shifted from the position it's taken in recent days. I have no reason to believe that. We'll have to wait to see, but I have no reason to believe that at all. Point of order, Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House has spoken, and the will of the House is clear. But the government have given no indication so far that they are going to facilitate the will of the House becoming a reality by amending statute. In fact, if anything, I think the Prime Minister gave the opposite impression in her rather churlish response to the events of tonight. If the government, Mr. Speaker, decides not to facilitate us changing the statute, which would prevent us leaving without a deal on the 29th of March, in clear contravention of the just expressed will of the House, what, Mr. Speaker, can you do to facilitate this Parliament in ensuring that the government will not get its way?
Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable lady. My understanding is that the government has tabled its motion for tomorrow, and it might help colleagues if they obtain copies of it. I don't think it's for me now to read out the government's motion for tomorrow. Very well. Very well. As I understand it, the government, in the name of the Prime Minister, and I thank the government for this, is tabling, or has tabled, a motion in the name of the Prime Minister that this House notes the resolutions of the House of the 12th and 13th of March and accordingly agrees the Government will seek to agree with the European Union an extension of the period specified in Article 50, subsection 3, agrees that if the House has passed a resolution approving the negotiated withdrawal agreement of the framework for the future relationship for the purposes of Section 13(1)(b) of the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018 by 20th March 2019, that the Government will seek to agree with the European Union a one-off extension of the period specified in Article 50, subsection 3 for a period ending on the 30th of June 2019 for the purpose of passing the necessary EU exit legislation, and notes that if the House has not passed a resolution approving the negotiated withdrawal agreement and the framework for the future relationship for the purposes of Section 13(1)(b) of the European Union Withdrawal Act 2018 by the 20th of March 2019, then it is highly likely the European Council at its meeting the following day would require a clear purpose for any extension, not least to determine its length, and any extension beyond the 30th of June 2019 would require the United Kingdom to hold European Parliament elections in May 2019. That is the order. That is the government's motion on the paper for tomorrow. That motion, of course, is amendable. That motion is amendable. So if colleagues on either side or in any part of the House wish to submit amendments to that motion, they will have an opportunity to do so. And I'm speaking on my feet and off the top of my head, but the same logic will apply in respect of that motion as has applied over the previous 2 days, namely that any amendments to it tabled before the rise of the House tonight will appear on the order paper tomorrow. However, if there are manuscript amendments tabled after the rise of the House but before 10:30 a.m. tomorrow, they will be accepted for consideration by the Chair, by me. I would very politely suggest to the Honourable Lady, I will take one further point of order if necessary, well, I would very politely suggest that very soon we ought at least to hear the business statement by the Leader of the House. I will take two very briefly. Well, no, I don't want to. Can I politely suggest that it might be advisable to. I will take one who signalled to me, the Honourable Lady, the member for Wakefield, and then let's hear the statement by the Leader. And if there are then further points of order, I can take them. Point of order, Mary Cray.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker, but the business motion that you've just read out at speed indicates that the government is clearly making this House a prisoner of its deal, because what it is saying is that we have to agree the deal by the 20th of March. And if we do that, we get the extension that this House is clearly going to be voting for tomorrow. When will the government allow this House to express any alternatives to the deal that the Prime Minister, despite having been defeated twice, is still trying to railroad through this place?
And that is one of the merits of hearing about the business for next week. And there is also merit in colleagues conferring with each other, as, not surprisingly and with frequency, they do. Very well. Point of order, Anna Soubry.
Speaker, it is a constitutional crisis, and I'm sorry if it bores people on that side of the House who have just voted as Conservatives for a no-deal Brexit. But in any event, Mr. Speaker, there is a real concern that time and again this House speaks and we vote as you have seen this evening, and the response at the dispatch box is in effect for what we pass to be utterly dismissed. And somehow, Mr. Speaker, we seek your guidance as a House as to how we actually can have a genuine impact on the way that this Brexit is now conducted and how this government responds. We hear tonight that 4 cabinet ministers abstained. We hear of other ministers who have resigned. It is a crisis of unprecedented levels, and I'm afraid it's a front bench that yet again has many pairs of tin ears, and it's got to stop. Do we need now to enact statute in some way so the will of this House can prevail?
I maintain that we should hear before very long the Leader of the House. I will take the right honourable gentleman. But what I would say to the right honourable lady is that I think she is well aware that a number of members across the House in recent weeks have had a concern about this particular policy issue, and if significant numbers of members across the House have a concern and a desire to act in common on this matter, it is open to them to explore the potential for doing so. And they will find that they get professional advice on that matter, as any member of the House is entitled to seek and obtain professional advice. It's not for me now here to say exactly what should happen, but what I will say is that members can work together and be heard. Point of order, yes. All right. The honourable gentleman doesn't need to put his hand up as he's in the classroom. It's not necessary. Point of order, Mr. Bob Seeley.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much indeed. Does the will of the House trump the will of the people?
That is a very interesting philosophical question, and I'm sure that the honourable gentleman has focused on it. This House operates in accordance with its own procedures, including, therefore, importantly, with its standing orders. It is not for me to seek to interpret the will of the people. The honourable gentleman who's a most dedicated public servant and has now been in the House for a little over 18 months, may well feel that he's very close to his people, and I don't say that in any pejorative spirit. He may well feel he is, and that he is deeply attuned to the will of the people. I don't claim that I am, and it's not for the Speaker to be. It is for the Speaker to seek to facilitate the will of the legislature. Point of order, Pat McFadden.
I'm grateful to you, Mr. Speaker. When the Prime Minister spoke at the dispatch box a couple of weeks ago to set out the arrangements for this week, she said if the House voted down her proposed deal, there would then be a vote on no deal today. That has happened, and she said that if the House voted against leaving on a no-deal basis, we would then have an opportunity to vote to ask the Government to seek an extension to Article 50. She did not say that was conditional on passing her deal between this week and the application of the extension. This motion, which the Government had tabled, is a breach of the letter and spirit of the assurances given at that dispatch box a couple of weeks ago. This is an attempt to stitch up the decision tomorrow. The House should not stand for it, and we should have a clean vote on instructing the Government to apply for an extension to Article 50 without having to approve her deal beforehand.
Yeah, well, I understand what the Right Honourable Gentleman is saying, but the Government's position is not a matter for me. I say with a matter of pride that I have never been a member of a government. It's never been part of my ambition. I must say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, it's a lot easier to be Speaker than to be a Minister. My responsibility is to consider amendments if they are tabled. That's my responsibility, and if members want to table amendments to the Government's motion, they can do so, and I rather imagine from what the Right Honourable Gentleman is saying that he would want to do so. Point of order, Mr Ed Miliband.
Mr Speaker, further to that point of order, I want to echo what my honourable friend said. People across this House will have heard the Prime Minister unconditionally say that these days would be about a vote on whether we would accept no deal and then a vote on an extension, not a conditional vote. And the Prime Minister sits on the front bench shaking her head. Maybe she can, through you, Mr Speaker, now explain why what you read out, Mr Speaker, is not a conditional vote, because it sure sounds like it to us.
No, okay. No, the Prime Minister is not seeking to raise a point of order at this stage. Point of order, Mr Ian Mearn.
I'm very grateful, Mr Speaker, and I think this actually might be a point of order. I'm just seeking some clarification from yourself, because you did say that the tabling of manuscript amendments tomorrow would be until 10:30. Well, the business begins at 9:30, and I thought there might be some disparity there.
So I can help the honourable gentleman. I appreciate that he was listening attentively. There is no contradiction or tension whatever. The honourable gentleman correctly surmises that the House tomorrow, as on every Thursday that we sit, will meet at 9:30. But I say this as much for the benefit of people listening to our proceedings as for the benefit of members. Question time is at 9:30. At 10:30 we would ordinarily have either urgent questions or move straight to the business statement from the Leader of the House. And I appreciate the honourable gentleman's concern, not just for colleagues, but for me, but I am perfectly sanguine about a deadline of 10:30 for the submission of amendments, and I am comfortable that I would be able to make judgments in time for the start of the debate, and for the debate to take place on an informed basis. So there is no problem there. Point of order, Neil Gray.
Thank you for your forbearance, Mr Speaker. The House has spoken, and has spoken very clearly. It is asked to rule out no deal at any time. Now, you said in response to the honourable member from North East Somerset and in response to the right honourable lady from Wallasey that the opportunities would be open for opposition members to ensure that the will of the House was followed through. But given that the government is in charge of the order paper, would you not expect the government to be coming forward with the necessary legislation to ensure that no deal is ruled out at any time?
not sure that it's really for me to say that I expect one particular course of action or another. I feel now that I've been around a little while, and sometimes predictable things have happened, and sometimes some very unpredictable and even in some cases rather curious things have happened. So I've got used to all range of possibilities. And I don't think I would say that I expect this or I expect that. What I do expect, not specifically of the government, what I expect is that if members feel strongly dissatisfied with what is an offer to them, they will communicate with each other and they will come forward, seek professional advice, seek my own, and attempt to ensure that what they wish to be debated as elected members of the legislature is indeed debated, and of course by definition not just debated but voted upon by the House. Right. Yes, point of order, Mr. Peterbone.
Following on to what you have just said, isn't it a fact that the moaning minis on the other side attacking the government, if they really had any guts, the way to do it is to table a confidence motion in the government. That's how it's traditionally done, not by some backdoor means.
Perfectly legitimate. The honourable gentleman expresses his point of view with his characteristic force. It's open to people to table motions of no confidence. Of course it is. That is a perfectly proper course of action, and that can happen and does from time to time. I think we'll leave it there. If there are no further points of order, we come now to the emergency business statement by the Leader of the House, Andrea Leadsom.
Mr. Speaker, in light of tonight's decision, I should like to inform the House that tomorrow's business will now be a debate on a motion relating to an extension of Article 50. On Friday the 15th of March, the House will consider private members' bills. I shall announce next week's business tomorrow in the usual way. Thank you.
Valerie Vaz.
Mr. Speaker, yet again we have an emergency motion to the House, and yet again we've only just had sight of this motion. My honourable friend has managed to give us copies of it. This is no way to run a government and no way to run a country. We've got a situation now where the government are voting against their own motions, which is a terrible state of affairs. The government is staggering from week to week, day to day and motion to motion. The country, Mr. Speaker, deserves better.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you. The Leader. Sorry. The Leader of the House. The Leader. No, the Leader doesn't wish to comment on that. No, fair enough. No, I mean it's a business statement, so she can respond if she wishes. No, she doesn't wish to do so. Very well. Mr. Peake Wishart.
Neither wonder does she choose not to respond, because that was quite a pathetic statement, given the events that have happened tonight, the chaotic cluelessness at the heart of government. The public must be watching this place and wondering what on earth is still going on, and the petulant response from the Prime Minister was quite unsatisfactory to the events that have just preceded that thing. This government is still determined to flog a dead deal, and at some point they're going to have to accept that this game is over. Now, we just got sight of this motion for tomorrow, and it seems to me that it's readily amendable. All we need to get rid of is the first two parts, and we'll get to what this House really wants and requires, which is an extension of Article 50 indefinitely until we get this issue resolved and we can do these other things. Because what has to happen, Mr. Speaker, is the will of the House has to be respected in these matters. And I've seen the business for next week. I've seen the provisional business. There's nothing in it, nothing at all. So what this government can do is bring forward a piece of legislation which reflects the wishes of this House to put down a motion which will ensure that no deal is taken off the table through legislation. And can we hear from the Leader of the House that that is in her thinking, and that's what she intends to do, because that's what this House expects and that's what this country now expects.
Well, as the honourable gentleman will know, the Prime Minister set out some time ago now that should the House reject the withdrawal agreement and future declaration, that there would be a discussion for the House to decide whether it wished to take leaving the EU without a deal off the table, and then should the House make that decision, there would then be a further discussion on whether the House wishes to seek an extension to Article 50. That is the motion that will be discussed tomorrow, and as my right honourable friend the Prime Minister has just said, tomorrow's motion will set out the fundamental choices facing this House. If this House finds a way in the coming days to support a deal that this House has decided to support, then that will allow the Government to seek a short, limited technical extension to Article 50 to the 30th of June 2019 to provide time to pass the necessary legislation and ratify the agreement we have reached with the EU. If the House doesn't, however, find the way to support a deal in the coming days, and it is not willing to support leaving without a deal on the 29th of March, then it is highly likely that the EU will require a clear purpose for any extension, not least to determine its length, and that any extension beyond the 30th of June 2019 would require the United Kingdom to hold European Parliament elections in May. I hope that answers the honourable gentleman's question.
Thank you. Chris Bryant.
The motion that we now know is going to be debated tomorrow, and doubtless may be amended or subject to amendments, says that the House has to agree a motion on approving the negotiated withdrawal agreement and framework by the 20th of March. Yes. Does that mean that the Government intends to bring forward the same motion as we have already dismissed in this session of Parliament on Monday or Tuesday of next week? If so, I would gently suggest to the Leader of the House that this flouts all the conventions that have operated in this House since the 16th century, where it has always been held that if a motion has been dismissed in one session of Parliament, it cannot be brought again. And regularly, clerks refuse to accept 10-minute rule bills and private members' bills that have already been disposed of in the session. So are we going to have that on Monday or Tuesday? And if so, does she not confidently expect the Speaker to refuse to allow it?
Well, the honourable gentleman will be aware that the House has just voted twice on the amendment in the name of my right honourable friend, the member for Meriden, amongst others, and that was on the same amendment.
That's not true. Angela Regal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It appears to me that the Leader of the House is merely organising to have meaningful vote 3 on exactly the same deal, in complete contravention of the will of this House, as has been expressed now in two defeats of this bill, the government motion. And shouldn't she, instead of attempting to play this ridiculous game of chicken with the future of our country, and her attempt to tear up all the conventions of this House and show nothing but contempt for the way in which this House has made its decisions, shouldn't she be facilitating the decisions of this House by moving an amendment, an SI, which will take the date of us leaving the European Union, 29th of March 2019, out of the statute? Isn't that what her job is?
Well, the Right Honourable Lady will be aware that the motion tomorrow is amendable. It is for this House to decide if it wants to put forward amendments and vote on them. And as my Right Honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has said, if the House votes for an extension, she will seek to agree that extension approved by the House with the EU and will bring forward the necessary legislation to change the exit date commensurate with that extension.
Kirsty Blackman.
Well, does the programme motion tomorrow mean that the votes will be at the moment of interruption, or will they be at some other time?
The motion of the House sets out that it will be at the moment of interruption, but of course that is subject to agreement of the House.
Maria Regal.
Speaker, can the Leader of the House undertake this evening
to ensure at the end of this process that the government, and she uses her best endeavours to make sure it happens, facilitates the will of the House by making time and bringing forward statutory changes to enable the will of this House to be enacted, instead of simply offering us more motions that don't do and do not have the operative executive impact that this House has voted for. Will she undertake to do that?
Well, what I can say to the Right Honourable Lady is that the Prime Minister and I have both said that if the House votes for an extension, we will seek to agree that extension approved by the House with the EU, and we will bring forward the necessary legislation to change the exit date commensurate with that extension. But as has been said on a number of occasions, it is not within the government's gift to insist on an extension. That will be a matter for agreement with the European Union and will potentially be subject to conditions imposed by it, and she will be aware that it will require unanimous agreement by all 27 members of the EU. But what I can reassure her is that that decision would come back to this House finally and would need to be approved by Parliament.
Clive Efford.
It's only a little while ago that the government was attacking the Leader of the Opposition for not agreeing to meet with the Prime Minister. Now, if we were trying to fulfil the will of the House, surely the government would be reaching out to all sections of this House to try and find a way through this. So can the Leader of the House say where in this timetable is a facility for those sorts of discussions to take place?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman will be aware that the Prime Minister has sought to reach out to members right across the House. The Leader of the Opposition was willing to meet on one occasion only, and that's very late on in the discussions. But the Prime Minister and ministers, including the Brexit Secretary, have sought to get the views of members right across this House and will continue to do so.
Vernon Coker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the House, as she knows, has a hugely important constitutional role. That is to be the voice of Parliament to government.
Yep.
What we're seeing is, and I say this to the Leader of the House, is vote after vote in this chamber seemingly is being ignored by the government, as we heard from the Prime Minister earlier this evening. Tomorrow, the Leader has announced that we are to have a motion on extending Article 50. Which can be amended. What would the Leader say to me if this House passes those amendments, takes out the conditionality that the government have put into it? As we've seen over the last 2 or 3 votes, it appears the government will just ignore the vote.
Yep.
How is it that we can have confidence in the motions that we discuss, the motions that we pass, and how can we have confidence in the Leader who has demonstrated in other areas that she has spoken up for Parliament? She should be roaring to the executive that this will of the Parliament as being expressed is being ignored. What is she going to do about that?
Well, what I would say to the Honourable Gentleman is I take very seriously my role as Parliament's voice in government, and at all times I seek to ensure that the views across the House are heard in government very clearly, and I will always stand up for Parliament in that way. And as I have always said, the government takes very seriously views expressed by this House. The Prime Minister has been clear that if this House votes for an extension, the government will seek to agree that extension with the EU and will bring forward the necessary legislation to change the exit date commensurate with that extension.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, this needn't be the Schleswig-Holstein question all over again, but it does risk driving us all a bit mad. But now that no deal has been ruled out by the House, is it now not the case that the only thing within the House's gifts in its entirety, not having to rely on Member States of the European Union, is the revocation of Article 50 in its entirety?
Well, the honourable gentleman will be fully aware that the revocation of Article 50 would mean we were not leaving the European Union, and therefore we were in direct contravention of the will of the people expressed in the referendum, and the government will not be doing that.
I'd simply say to colleagues, I think it is clear that whatever the House decides will not be a state secret. That will become public. It will be known. That message will be communicated. In fairness, I think the Leader of the House has acknowledged that whatever the House decides, it will be communicated to the European Union. That will happen, and the wording of what has been decided will be absolutely crystal clear. So the will of the House will be forwarded to the European Union, whatever that will is. Mr. David Linden.
Given that we have seen lots of briefings that meaningful vote free will take place at some point next week, and given that the pound appears to be going tonto just about every day, can the Prime Minister tell us when meaningful vote free will be, so that the markets can prepare for that nonsense next week again?
Well, what I can say to the honourable gentleman is I will be announcing next week's business tomorrow, but obviously he will be aware that what we're focused on now is trying to identify what is the will of the House, and that's why we've brought forward a motion so that the House can discuss tomorrow its desire or otherwise for an extension to Article 50.
Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll not rehearse the sequence of events that we were promised this week in terms of why we've got here this evening, but I'm utterly astonished that the Leader of the House has produced this motion for us to debate tomorrow, which is essentially a forerunner to meaningful vote number 3, because the entirety of the motion is dependent upon this House giving an expression again by the 20th of March of not what she said to the honourable gentleman for Perth and North Perthshire of a deal, but the negotiated withdrawal agreement and the framework for the future relationship, which is the current EU withdrawal agreement and the current framework for future relationship that this House has already rejected twice. So if you are listening to the will of this House, this motion tomorrow should clearly say we have listened to the will of the House and we will go back to the European Union to seek an extension, should it not?
Well, as I've said to a number of honourable members, the government is listening very carefully to the views of the House. That's why my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, said that we would, if the meaningful vote was not passed, that we would come back to the House today with a vote on rejecting a no-deal Brexit, and in the event that that was passed, that we would come back to the House tomorrow to seek the House's views on an extension of Article 50. So that is exactly what we are doing. And the Prime Minister has further, as have I just now, said that we will seek, if the House wants an extension to Article 50, we will seek to agree that with the European Union. But what honourable members do have to understand, it is not within the government's gift to insist on an extension. That will be a matter for agreement with the European Union.